So, good afternoon. In the margins, I am Ralph Newell from Diversity Issues in Higher Education, and today's guest is Nathan Nguyen, Director of LGBT Student Services at Western Michigan University. Nathan, welcome. We'll just jump right in. The mission, I was reading at your office, LGBT Student Services at Western Michigan part of the mission is to ensure equitable access for all and to promote a campus climate that affirms and supports the academic and personal development of all students, inclusive of their sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. What have been the biggest challenges to this mission for you so far?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer. So, I think the biggest challenges are always changing. It's never you think where the hash marks are on the playing field, and then suddenly they're changed or they've moved, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, that's because of political whims.
Mm.
That is a really big factor, as well as public opinion. And so public opinions can alter and change for a variety of different reasons. So in the past, when this office was created, and just to note, this office is the second oldest university office in the state of Michigan.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've been around for 30 plus years. We started in 1989. And we're tied for like the sixth oldest in the nation. And so at the time of its inception, it was the National March in Washington for LGBT rights had just started. And so it was more about like, hey, you will recognize that LGBT identities exist, and you will, treat us as equals, stop discriminating against us. In the last 10 to 15 years, there's a lot about marriage equality relationship equality and rights. And so now I think right now, what I am seeing personally, now that I've done this work now for 10 plus years, is understanding what it means to be inclusive of transgender and gender nonconforming identities. And I think that is a really big hurdle that is on the horizon or is already here.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to actually talk about that a little bit later, but since you brought
Mhm.
it up, we can, kind of go there and I'll go back. I was going to say almost similarly to you that, you know, I've been working studying, working with in higher ed, I guess, the past 30 years. And I was going to say that I've noticed from
Mhm.
when I first started to today that the light, if you will, shown on the LGBTQ community has gotten better. It seems like access and equity and equality on campus has gotten better. But I was going to say in the past 10 years, I was going to say for the transgender community, it seems to have just gotten worse. But that was just me anecdotally. And now
Mhm.
you're confirming what I thought, because I had not done anything from a research standpoint to validate my thoughts. But
Mhm.
that just seems to be the chatter. So what what more do you have to say about that? What are you guys doing on your campus for that community?
Right. And I do want to point out that, like, in some ways, yes, it does seem worse, but in other ways, also understand that there is more visibility.
Hmm.
And so then because there's more visibility, there's more discussion, right? So for every forward movement, there's also a backwards movement, right? So to speak,
Hmm.
right? Um, and so some of the things that have happened in the past 10 years, 15 years, is the fact that transgender identity is now included in the diagnostic manual in the American Psychology Association, and there are pros and cons to that.
Hmm.
And homosexuality is no longer considered a mental diagnosis, a mental health diagnosis, right?
Hmm.
So and as I said, there are pros and cons to having gender dysphoria in the diagnostic manual. The pro being that if a trans person were to seek services for medical transition, they can get it hypothetically under their insurance because there's a diagnosis. The con being is that you have to get a diagnosis. And so that can mean going to a therapist and meeting with the therapist anywhere between 6 months to a year. And these are guidelines that are put forth, they're recommendations, I should say. They're recommendations put forth by the World Professional Association of Transgender Health, or WPATH. And so, yeah, you have to understand that there are some folks who are like, there's a stigma about going into and seeking out mental health services. And so, and I'm definitely one of them, right? Because of the cultural mindset that I have. Both my parents are Southeast Asian. The mindset is that we don't talk about our problems. It is a sign of weakness, right? It is a bad reflection on the family, right? And so as a young college student, it never occurred to me that I could talk to somebody about some questions I might had, or maybe I am struggling a little bit, because to acknowledge that you're struggling, particularly as a person of color, that's just not happening.
Right. I feel you on that.
Yeah. And so then when you add an LGBTQ identity, that could be another thing. It's like, is this therapist going to be cool with my LGBTQ identity or any other identity that I might hold, whether it's a disability, a person of color, etc. And so, as I said, there's a pro and a con to having that in the manual. And and again, WPATH says these are just recommendations. It depends on what you're comfortable with, what you have access to, whether financially or by location, even, and what makes the most sense for you.
So, I mean, gosh, you bring up something else that I was thinking about. When it comes, your office being a student support office, um, how do you support the
Mhm.
students, in particular, LGBT students that are also part of other marginalized groups because of their race, religion, or even their politics,
Right.
things like that. So how does that intersectionality come into play
Yeah.
for your support?
And the interesting thing about the state of Michigan is we have to be very careful that um, how we frame things, and so I say often a lot that our office is open to anybody. You do not have to be LGBTQ.
Hmm.
Just note that the rules, the guidelines of the space is that if you say something that is harmful or impacts in a negative way this community, that you may be asked to leave, right?
Hmm.
And that's like any rule, right? Like you invite somebody over to your house, anybody's welcome to my house, but if you disrespect my rules, like you're out the door, right?
Right, right, right. No, you're right. You're right. Yeah.
End of story. But I often say a lot that as an undergraduate student 20 years ago, you would not catch me dead in an LGBT office. And the irony is that I now run an LGBT office, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And that was mainly because I was terrified of what if somebody from my community sees me
Hmm.
walking in and out of this office, right?
Right,
And additionally, at that time, 20 years ago, you have to think 20 years ago, the representation of what it meant to be LGBTQ was very white, very middle class, very able bodied, so on and so forth, right?
right.
And so I was like, who in that office is going to understand what it's like to be like a first generation student, a student of color, a child of immigrants? That's just for me and my personal story, right?
Right.
So, and I say that mainly because what I try to do is we do programs and events that are not just in this office, but maybe collaborations with other
Hmm.
offices and other departments, or I will stop at different student clubs and just make an introduction and like, hey, my name's Nathan. I am the director of this office. You got any questions? You can always come by and see me. Let me know how I can support, and that sort of thing. And it's not just showing up in like the first week when classes began, but trying to show up on a more regular basis, so that way students start trusting that you're an administrator that they can trust, that can talk to, that they can relate to, and then they'll start stopping in, into the office and that sort of thing.
You kind of reminded me of something when you said that, how you just show up at meetings or other group functions. Uh, in another part of my wife's life, she used to run counseling and, tutoring support
Right.
uh, at a college. And that's exactly what she said. I would go to classes in the beginning of the semester to talk to them about what our office does. Um, you know, maybe 100 students in the class, and she says, maybe one to come, but it was worth me going there because we were able to support that student. So I was thinking about this before my conversation with you, of what type of outreach or what can be done
Mhm.
for those students who need your support, but they haven't come.
Right.
Is that something that you guys are proactive about, or you just wait?
Both.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, both. So in a lot of the collaborations I do, I work with our on-campus counseling services. I work with our
Hmm.
housing. I definitely try to do as much work as possible with our multicultural affairs students in our multicultural affairs department. Um, because again, I know that folks are more than just any one identity, right?
Right.
And so putting a name with a face is really important, and also getting students to understand who we are and that are invested in them, and that sometimes it's just a matter of finding personalities that fit that you can talk with and sit down and hang with and that sort of thing. The other thing is also trying to empower students. So
Hmm.
we'll do a variety of different workshops, educational workshops, and when I say educational, I don't mean like a boring lecture or anything like
Hmm.
that.
Right. Right. No,
um,
I get it.
it could be so some of the things we do is like safe on campus. A lot of universities do this, and they call it like safe zone or ally training or anything like that. And what this is, it's if we refer back to my example as an undergraduate student, again, I would not be comfortable coming into an LGBT office, right? I was terrified
Hmm.
of that. But if I saw that my RA was trained or a teacher I already knew was trained, I'd be more likely to talk to them because I already
Right.
had a relationship with them, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And this is not to say that these folks who are trained are going to be all encompassing and knows what it means to be LGBTQ.
Right.
However, they are going to be open to that conversation and welcoming, and maybe try to assist in making the appropriate referrals.
Hmm.
So on our campus, we do have safe on campus training, and that's open to students, faculty, and staff. And I try to offer other workshops as well, where maybe I'll do a workshop about intersectionality, right?
Hmm.
And I just did one for the library, right? Or last year, the Latino Student Association asked me to come in and like do the like racialized gender roles, right?
Hmm.
Because a lot of times in these discussions about gender and gender identity, the root thing in there is a lot of theories that not all, but a lot of theories that are based under like white scholars and white scholarship, right? And
Right.
so looking at how gender can be um, attributed and exhibited and expressed in different ways when you add race to that, right? And so that
Hmm.
was a really good conversation to have, and having them like talk about that and interact with that, and then trying to empower students to kind of acknowledge these things and learn about these things, and then also students have a way of speaking to each other that I just can't.
Right. We get old quick, right?
Yeah, we do. We do.
I mean, it's like
Yeah.
you're like, I don't even know what my kids say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So empowering the students to um, talk to each other and recognize and acknowledge these things. And that has worked too, because the last institution I worked at, I intentionally brought in a counselor who identified with the Asian American students there, and
Hmm.
we did the suicide prevention training. And not long after I left, sure enough, the students were able to notice some things of another student and were able to get the help that that student needed.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah, because I was going to ask you. So just go back to clarify. Um, at your institution, you guys do provide
Mhm.
LGBT sensitivity, if you will, training on
Mhm.
campus.
Yes.
Um, sort of, I'm looking at it, I guess it's a little more granular than and I'm using this loosely, I'll say the generic diversity training that,
Mhm.
students get in orientation, faculty and staff get, periodically.
Right.
But you guys do get granular, if you will,
Mhm.
and looking at the LGBT. Okay, that's good because I was kind of wondering how many campuses do that.
Mhm.
Is that the norm, becoming the norm? What do you know in regards to that?
So I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but the
Mhm.
Consortium of Higher Education LGBTQ Resource Professionals, we just call it
Yeah,
consortium because it's such a long name,
yeah, I get it.
lists a variety of different universities as far as whether or not they have like a full-time position or just a graduate assistant and that sort of thing. So a lot of universities do have this training. And again, that is to create more awareness and like more of a safety net across campus as opposed
Hmm.
to, oh, just send these gay kids or trans kids to the one corner of campus, right?
Right, right.
um, and so this is a way to not only create more inclusion across campus and awareness across campus, but getting folks to take a reflection about what are some ways that they can be inclusive. And it can
Hmm.
be something as simple as including pronouns in your email signature to um, providing resources that they know of that are LGBTQ friendly, right?
Right.
So when I say providing resources that are LGBTQ friendly, it could be anything such as um, a survivor of sexual assault looking for
Hmm.
resources, and they're looking for resources that are specifically LGBTQ friendly, right? Because that's going to hit different, right? Than if it
Right, right.
was like just heterosexual only, or for women only, for that matter.
Hmm.
Um, and so these are things that we try to do and try to be inclusive. And I think the only thing that I have seen that does draw some concern for me is are there are some institutions where it is mandated or required, and
Hmm.
and and I have concerns about that because I don't want to give a sign, a sticker, or a placard saying that this person is safe on campus trained, and they still um, feel some sort of way about LGBTQ identities, right? And not an inclusive way.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no, I'm totally with you on that.
Yeah.
It's as an aside, if you will, at diverse, we go on campus and do diversity training. And on some campuses, when we go, and it's just open to the institution, you know what I mean? Anybody can come. I find that a lot of times we're training and preaching to the choir.
Right.
These people already get it. They're just coming for, some extra reinforcement, or, they just
Mhm.
want to have a safe space to talk, or they're coming for the free food that's being given out. I don't know, but
Right.
it doesn't get as deep. And then the times when we go where it's been mandated, you know, you get the looks. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I don't want to be here. So I don't know if there's what the middle ground on that is, but
Right. So what we do on this training is at the end, it's a 3-hour training, um,
mhm.
first and foremost. At the end of the training, that's when there's a pledge that they can, and it's voluntary again, if they want to sign off on it, saying that, yes, I do want to be listed as an ally.
Okay.
Uh, Um, yes, I understand that I'm not going to be an expert, but I am someone who's going to be welcoming of
Mhm.
that conversation, um, and that sort of thing. And it's only when they sign yes to that pledge do they get the placard. So
Right,
there are some folks who have done the training who have not said yes
right.
to the placard. And so that is, I guess, a way of splitting hairs, so to
Mhm.
speak, where folks have the training now, and for whatever reason, maybe they don't feel comfortable in that, or they don't feel like they have enough comfort or content to be that resource for our students, and that is totally fine.
I mean, I hear you on that. And when you first said that, I started thinking back again, to this diversity work of
Mhm.
faculty and staff of color who, just because they are of color, they get put on every type of diversity committee.
Right,
And so I'm thinking maybe some people don't want to do it. 'Cause, okay, I just can't have another responsibility, kind of
right,
thing. But they're
and
still allies.
yeah, and that's the thing is, like, there's not, I don't throw any other additional responsibilities to our
Mhm.
allies at this moment because I don't have the capacity
Right,
to.
right.
I am an office of one, and I do have one person that I have that is grant funded.
Hmm.
And that is part-time. And so, um, could there be something in the future where we have more engagement? Yes. And so some of the workshops that I have done have been more of like the advocate piece.
Hmm.
And so getting folks to understand that, yes, they have done the training, but understanding that it's a spectrum, right, of inclusion, right? And it's not a binary, because often what happens, and this is what I've noticed in the past 5 years or so, is that folks will say that they are an ally. And I have a terrible poker face. So
Right.
uh, yeah, folks will say an ally, and I just kind of give them this little look of like, but what are you doing? What are you actively
Right.
doing to help the community? And
Hmm.
so a lot of the trainings that I have is getting folks to acknowledge and really reflect on, are they someone who is not saying these hurtful things,
Right.
or are they someone who's willing to speak up when they see something happening that is hurtful? Uh,
Mhm.
I and just how much are they going to do as far as like speaking up? That
Right.
is so really getting them to really think about that for themselves, what they're comfortable with,
Mhm.
and what they want to do, and also understanding for themselves that they have different privilege and marginalized identities as well, and so
Right.
what that looks
Right.
like when they speak up.
Right. I want to go back to something you were talking about earlier, the collaboration that you
Mhm.
do with, other groups on campus. You mentioned that, like, for example, the Latinx group. Yeah, I know this is like oil and water, if you will. But how much outreach, or have you done any outreach? Do you do any work with any of the religious groups on campus?
Yes, actually, and not as much as I like to, because again, I'm one person.
Hmm. Hmm.
But we do have some LGBTQ affirming faith affiliations, like different branches of faith affiliations.
Right.
Um, I do have several students where they're LGBTQ students, where faith is a very strong part of their identity as well.
Right.
And so, I'm always welcome to having that conversation and collaboration of seeing like, okay, if we were to host a program or event or whatever it may be, what is this going to look like? What do we hope folks get out of this? Um, and that sort of thing. So I'm, as I said, I'm always open to collaborations and having discussions. And I'm also acknowledging that there are people's interpretations of their faith identity is very personal.
Hmm.
And so that's something that, I say a lot in our trainings is that, not here to change your personal interpretations or beliefs. And we are also, but we are talking about how are we being inclusive on this campus.
Hmm.
So yeah, definitely open to that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's fascinating to me, the intersections that we all have when it
Mhm.
comes to race, religion, or sexuality, class. I mean, all these different things, and it's taking me back to, and I want to read an excerpt from an article to you, and then sort of get your reaction to it. And it's dealing with religion. Um, this is an article that Diverse ran earlier this month. Leanne Herter, one of our writers, wrote, and it was entitled "Erased from the Record: Queerness at Conservative Christian Schools. And before you even get into that, honestly, the first campus that I ever went on that I duly saw and went into an LGBT center was actually at a religious school.
Mhm.
Um, if we had one at my undergrad or graduate schools, I just wasn't aware of it. I can't say that we didn't have one, but the first one that I saw that, they were eager to take me to and show was actually at Georgetown University. So,
Mhm.
and I was somewhat shocked, because I grew up in a Christian home. Um, and at my church, they didn't really talk about, you know, homosexuality, gayness, maybe a smidgen of mention every now and then. But, I knew it was quote unquote, taboo, if you will, from the church standpoint. So I was very surprised to see that at Georgetown. But, I come to learn that, they're a Jesuit school and they are very open to the whole person. But anyway, this article here that we wrote in Diverse, I just want to read the opening portion to it. And you may know this story, but just moments before, Samantha Lynn Motto had considered backing out of her decision. But then Dr. Peter Crift, professor of philosophy at Boston College, addressed for the 2000 commencement at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio. He began speaking about uncomfortable truths found in the world and included the following statement: "Men cannot become women, only better or badder men," he said. Motto understood press quote as a reference to transgender people. Everyone laughed, the whole crowd laughed. They really don't think that LGBTQ plus exists here in this space, said Motto. So I was like, there's about to be a big uncomfortable truth coming at you right now. The cold feet get real hot real quick. I was ready. When her name was called for earning a master's of arts in clinical mental health counseling, Motto followed through with her plan. She pulled a scrunchie off her wrist, and on it she had sewn two flags representing bisexual and LGBT pride. They waved at her side as she walked across the stage, and she accepted her degree. For those physically in attendance and those watching the live stream, Motto's flags were seen and her accomplishments were celebrated. But hours later, when Franciscan uploaded the live stream recording to his website, Motto discovered that she had been edited out, while the rest of her graduating class was shown crossing the stage.
So unfortunately, that student's experience is not uncommon. And I don't remember what institution it was recently. It was another Jesuit institution where a lot of students protested the institution's ban on LGBTQ relationships. And they
Hmm.
protested that by handing the president or the chancellor a pride flag anytime they walked up. And so,
Okay.
yeah,
Wow.
that was one that recently made headlines as well. The there has to be an understanding that to be LGBTQ inclusive is also saving lives.
Hmm.
And that is something that we are doing. It's not only saving lives, but it's encouraging student success and retention and matriculation.
Right.
Um, there was another student also at BYU who managed to sew the pride flag into her gown. And so that
Hmm.
way, when she walked across stage and she opened it, you could see the rainbow colors, right?
Cool.
Um, Studies have shown that LGBTQ folks who are forced to hide their identity have a higher rate of anxiety and depression. And that can lead to um, some unhealthy coping mechanisms. It could also lead to students um, not attending coursework or doing coursework for that matter. Um, and so that can affect, again, students who are looking to succeed in their higher academic careers. And I bring this up because it's not that LGBTQ that let me rephrase, let me back up. It's not to say that if you're LGBTQ, you're going to be all these things, right? That you're going to have depression or anxiety or anything like that. LGBTQ folks, there have been studies that are done where LGBTQ folks, if they are in a hostile environment, if they are facing a lot of outright homophobia or transphobia, or there's this great fear of being outed for their identity, then
Hmm.
they have a higher risk of anxiety and depression. And because of that, anxiety, depression may have lower grades, not attend class, lower matriculation rates, but also a increased risk of um, higher risk behaviors. And that could be anything from addiction to, higher risk sex behaviors and that sort of thing. So that is to say that to be LGBTQ does not automatically mean you're going to be in these, categories of things, right?
Hmm.
It is being LGBTQ in these hostile environments that you will have a predisposed or increased risk of these things, right?
Right.
And so, whenever these institutions are saying we don't um, condone LGBTQ identities or don't accept LGBTQ identities, they're basically saying that this is a not safe environment and not a welcoming environment for someone who
Mm,
may be exploring their identity.
that's
Um,
true.
and the other thing is also these offices exist in a way where young folks, particularly students, can explore what it means to be LGBTQ in a safe and controlled environment, right? As opposed to, you know, looking towards their friends or others uh,
Hmm.
and learning things that may be are not safe. And so this is what we're looking at is these institutions who are not inclusive and are not welcoming. What are other ways that they can be welcoming? And ways to again show that we're not here to change your personal interpretations and teachings, but understanding that we are here to support and love
Right.
those who are coming through our doors.
You alluded to it earlier, as you wouldn't go into an LGBT office when you were an undergrad because of your family, right?
Hmm.
And then, so I'm reading about the article that I was referencing earlier, and it goes on to talk about some other things in regards to, almost was like begging the question, well, if you're LGBT, if you're part of that community, why would you go to such a conservative institution? And so now you're getting into that, the intersectionality of people, of, where in some cases, and this is where the question is kind of going, of how do you support these LGBT students where their family, their religion, or their race is, maybe a more important identifier, if you will, for them.
Hmm.
Like, at least it carries more weight at the moment than being a part of the LGBT community. I mean, how do you get them to reconcile that and put it together so that, you know, they still can be a better person and stronger?
Right. So I think that's more of meeting students where they're at, right?
Mm-hmm.
I kind of do wish I'd come out earlier and more to my Asian and Asian American classmates and colleagues, because then that's
Mm-hmm.
when I met other LGBTQ Asian American cla-
Mm-hmm.
folks as well. So, at that time, I thought I was the only one in the entire state, right? The entire region, even, and then I found out I'm not, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, part of it is meeting students where they're at, letting them know that they're not alone in that process or that identity, right?
Right.
That others have been through similar journeys, and that there is a community that is supportive. And I think something that was very interesting is that the last institution I worked at, I did a lot of work with our Asian and Asian American students, and not all, but a majority of them were
Right.
very accepting and understanding of my LGBTQ identity. And so which is a complete 180 from what I personally experienced, right?
Right. Right.
And so it's meeting students where they're at, and also trying to establish some boundaries where they may feel safe in
Mm-hmm.
that. not completely 100% safe. We can't always guarantee that,
Right.
but at least, feel like they can be a little bit vulnerable without the fear of there being some sort of backlash, right? Um, and some of the other things that we try to do to support, like the week before Thanksgiving break, which is, it in our academic calendar, it's a little hectic because they come back from Thanksgiving break, they have another week of class, and then suddenly they're in finals week, right? So
Hmm.
the week before Thanksgiving break, we try to do things such as like a Thanksgiving LGBTQ inclusive Thanksgiving dinner, to show like, hey, if you're not welcome at home, or if it's weird at home, or if you don't want to go home at all, like you got family
Hmm.
here. You know, you can use
Wow.
the pronouns you have here, the name you have here. You can dress according to how you want to dress here. You got that here, and so let kind of as a reinforcement and reminder, like, hey, this can also be your home here. Uh,
No, that's that. I like that. That's really good. Um, and so, again, you talk about safe spaces and things like that, and I'm going back to the conversation here about, like you said, you wish you had come out earlier. Part of that, I'm assuming, is also not being comfortable with yourself. People didn't really talk about it. I'm sure they didn't
mhm,
talk about it at home. They definitely don't talk about it in schools. And I was reading earlier about LGBT laws. Federally, LGBTQ students are protected under Title IX, and this is actually the 50th anniversary of Title IX this year.
yes.
And and I guess it was last year, I believe it was, that the Department of Ed, Office of Civil Rights, had to literally come back out and reinterpret the rules for to say that discrimination based upon sexual orientation and all that is covered under Title IX. So LGBT students are protected under federal law. But there are not a lot of state laws, that support that community on campus. Now you're in Michigan, and actually, I'm understanding that Michigan was I think Ann Arbor was the first city, if I read that correctly, to actually pass LGBT legislation.
Mhm.
But I was reading further at the state level, at least, and I'm specifically speaking to Michigan since you're in Michigan. But they were saying there are no laws, if this is right, if what I read was correct, um, about LGBT anti-bullying in K through 12 or in colleges. Um, they're not allowed to teach any type of LGBT inclusive history education in schools or LGBT inclusive sex education. And so I'm thinking, like, man, if people got that exposure at the K-12 level going into college, what do you think that impact would be?
It would be tremendous, first and foremost. And I do want to back up that on a federal level, yes, we have marriage equality, but there are no protections for
Mhm.
LGBT people in the regards of housing, employment, and in access.
Right.
Um, and so on a state level here in Michigan, we do have protections for public employees,
Mhm.
and that includes sexual orientation and gender identity, but not for private sector employees. So me being a public employee in LGBTQ, I am protected, right? For unlawful termination if I, was a queer transgender person, right?
Mhm.
Um, but what does that mean in the private sector, right? And that can look different depending on county and on city, for that matter. And additionally, there are different companies that already have protections.
Mhm.
So if you look at the Human Rights Campaign or HRC, they have something called a Corporate Equality Index, and they list both Fortune 500 and Fortune 1000 companies on a scorecard of 0 to 100 of what are these companies doing as far as being inclusive. And that could be anything from partner benefits to having health insurance that does allow folks to transition, um, you know, that sort of thing, right? And so what are and just because, again, I do want to reiterate, just because these companies have that,
Mm-hmm.
yes, that is a good thing, but it still can look very nuanced, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it can look very um, different, right? So, for example, before my mother retired, she worked for a major insurance company. Not long after I came out, this is at the time in Florida. She could hear her coworkers talking negatively about LGBTQ people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, English is not her first language, and she's a woman of color. She's a former immigrant, and she's like, they're now talking about my kid, right? And so that really hit home for her. And I looked it
Mm-hmm.
up, and sure enough, the company that she worked for at the time does have LGBT inclusive policies. They scored like a perfect 100 at that time. Um,
Right. Wow.
but how is she going to speak up in that situation?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the answer was for her to not speak up. She just walked away, right?
Right.
Because she didn't know what to say in that. And,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's the ally advocate and accomplice piece I've been talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so her walking away was like she's not going to contribute to this negative conversation, right?
Right.
But she also didn't stop it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
nor did she advocate on my behalf, right, or anybody's behalf for that matter. They're like, hey, you don't know who here has a friend or family member who's LGBTQ.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're talking about my kid, right?
Right.
So what does that look like for folks? And that's a really hard conversation. And that's something I really try to get folks in the workshops I do to really take a hard look at themselves. Like, what are you really comfortable doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sure, you may come out to Pride and party with us, but are you like, you know, voting for people who are homophobic?
Right. Right. You really got me thinking, because I've heard the term, ally a lot over the years.
Mhm.
So, and I guess I had a definition in my mind. Um, I can't verbalize it right now, but I can write it down and think about it. But for you, how would you define an ally? How can a person or organization be a true ally?
So I want to state that like my ruler,
Hmm.
right? Because everybody has like their own ruler or their rubric, however you want to
Exactly.
call it.
Exactly what I was saying. I couldn't totally define it. Let me just hear what you got to say.
Right. So and I do have an exercise for this in my training is what I call like a heterosexism scale, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is somebody who is very hateful, somebody who would actively go out and try to physically hurt somebody who's LGBTQ, versus a 10 is somebody who's willing to stick their neck out to save someone who's LGBTQ.
Okay.
So when I think of ally, I think of somebody that's probably closer to like a 6 or a 7 on that scale.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's the thing that I want folks to realize is that a lot of times when I said I would give these people these looks when somebody said, oh, I'm
Right.
an
Right.
ally, right? It's like, but what are you actually doing, right? So the reason
Hmm.
why I'm giving
Hmm.
them these looks is because a lot of times they say that they're an ally, they think they're a 10 on that scale.
Right. Right.
They're
Right.
not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So I mean, now I got your scale in my mind here, and
Uh-huh.
I'm just thinking about the story you just told about your mother. And when she was in that situation, she didn't engage, so that was positive, and
Right.
she walked away, which also could send a message to people: hey, maybe we shouldn't be talking about this. But she didn't say anything. So on your scale, would that be like a 5?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably like a 5, like a 4
Okay.
or 5. Yeah.
Yeah.
She didn't contribute to the harmful messages, but she also didn't
Hmm.
stop it. So that's like
Right.
a 5, right?
Exactly. I kind of felt that was kind of like right in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see what you thought about that. Um, so shifting gears to, to the larger community, we're talking about state law and things like that. And you do a lot of cross collaboration work with groups on campus. What about beyond campus? What about literally in the Kalamazoo community? Do you guys do anything with local groups?
Yes, we do things with Outfront Kalamazoo, which is our local LGBT center that is not affiliated
Okay.
with the campus at all. It's for anybody, so it could be youth to elderly to that sort of thing. So just earlier this month they had Pride, so they hosted Pride. So we'll show up at Pride definitely. We also and try to collaborate in different events as well. So this last, what is it? March, April? I'll have to look at. I want to say it's like April. The last day of April or April 29th, there's Transgender Day of Visibility. And that is a way to celebrate transgender identities. Some of my colleagues at other universities, they'll do a transgender pool party or a trans inclusive pool party. And so this being a campus that works a lot. We used to have a big, large, competitive pool, and unfortunately it got closed down due to pandemic-related budget cuts. But we collaborated with our local YMCA to do the pool party there.
Okay.
Yeah, and that is mainly because facilities are always a sticking point. Appropriate pool attire is another sticking point. In different body types, and I'm not talking just transgender body types, but like the body types that aren't for men's health or for women's health, right?
You say no more. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Bodies that don't have the 6-pack, the 8-pack, or whatever, or all the curves in the right places. Some of us have more than others, and that's fine, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll do collaborations. We've done collaborations with the YMCA, the YWCA, Outfront Kalamazoo, and others.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, hey, we're getting close to ending up here. Just one sort of last big question I wanted to ask you. Sort of speaking to our audience, and a lot of folks that listen are, they're higher education leaders. So
Right.
what, and they have a lot of things to worry about on campus. But specifically when it comes to their LGBTQ students and even their staff, give me a couple of core issues that you think they should be concerned about moving forward?
For public institutions, thankfully, they already majority already have sexual orientation and gender identity in their non-discrimination policies, right? And that's overall. But then looking at drilling down further, right? What does that look like? So, for example, if you're building new buildings, do you have all gender, ADA accessible, multi-stall restroom? And that's not just for LGBTQ students, that's also for your ADA folks, for disabilities, as well as parents of small children. How many times do you have families coming in and they're here for graduation or something, right? And they're bringing their kids. So you want to make sure that the dad who's bringing their daughters is able to bring their young daughters, they're able to safely go into the bathroom, right? And that's just helpful, drilling it further down. So when we're building new buildings like that, bathrooms just being one of them, what is our state building codes? Are they up to date with international building codes, which do include that, right? So looking at the broad picture, but also looking at further down of what are our housing policies, what are our admissions policies, so on and so forth, and looking at what are the possible trends 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as far as being more inclusive, right? And what are the systems, the rigid systems that are currently in place that we have to kind of work around with, right? So another state that I worked in, the Board of Governors is very strict, saying there will be no gender inclusive housing, not just at this one institution, but all the institutions for the state. So what can we do as housing to work with our transgender and gender non-conforming students to ensure that they can find housing on campus that is equitable and safe
Mm-hmm.
and that acknowledges their identity, right? Um, so looking further and it's like, yeah, we have a non-discrimination policy. It was like, okay, well, what does that look like as a student applies to your institution, sets foot on your institution, goes to class in your institution, goes to the gym at your institution.
Right.
So really walking you through those process, not only for your students, but also your faculty and staff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. Last thing, just fill in the blank question for you to answer. The question or the statement is, I could do more for the LGBT community
If I had full staffing and a larger budget. And that is, yeah, again, because I'm one person and also, having a budget and then also moving closer to the central part of campus where students are stopping in between classes, because then I get to know them better, know what they're doing, and be able to notice when maybe they're not feeling so great or whatever, right? And be able to address that better.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Nathan, for joining us today on In the Margins. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. I'm going to stop the recording.